Imagine mist rolling low over endless green fields. A single wooden door painted the color of moss, creaking open just as golden light spills across the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls out, and the whole world seems to wake up in slow motion. This is not a movie set. This is an ordinary Tuesday morning in the countryside of Pakistan. Here, mornings smell like rain-soaked earth and fresh bread, baking over an open flame. Rivers of mist drift between mango orchards heavy with fruit. Children run barefoot past grazing goats while their grandparents sip tea on a rope bed beneath a tree older than the village itself. This is living in Pakistan. This is life in the countryside. Harvesting fruits, feeding animals, and the simplest, most beautiful version of rural living you may have ever seen. Pakistan is home to over 240 million people, yet nearly two-thirds of them still live in rural areas, far from the busy streets of Karachi or Lahore. In these villages, life is shaped not by deadlines and notifications, but by sunlight, seasons, and soil. Here, a single day can hold more genuine calm than an entire week in a modern city, and the deeper you go into this world, the more magical it becomes. Long before the sky turns orange, the countryside is already waking up. In most villages across Punjab, Sindh, and the northern valleys, the day begins with the call to prayer drifting gently from a nearby mosque, its sound carrying across still fields in the cool morning air. Almost at the same moment, a rooster somewhere nearby adds its own voice to the morning, as if nature itself is agreeing that it is time to begin. There is no alarm clock quite like this. The azan, the rooster, and the first hint of light working together to gently pull an entire village out of sleep. Farmers are usually among the first to rise, often before dawn has fully broken. They walk out into fields still damp with dew, the grass cool beneath their feet, mist hanging low over the crops like a soft blanket that has not yet decided to lift. In many villages, the sound of a hand pump or a small water motor echoes from a distance, drawing water up from the ground to fill channels that snake between rows of wheat or rice. It is one of the most familiar sounds of rural mornings, steady and rhythmic, almost like the countryside's own heartbeat. The air itself feels different here. It carries the faint smell of earth, of dew-soaked grass, and sometimes the distant scent of smoke from a wood fire being lit to prepare the first meal of the day. Somewhere close by, flatbread is often baking over an open flame, and that warm, slightly smoky smell of fresh roti mixes with the morning air in a way that feels like home even to someone visiting for the first time. But this quiet, simple start to the day is only the beginning, because what follows next, from the fields to the farm animals to the food on the table, tells an even deeper story about why so many people who live this life would never trade it for anything else. Pakistan is one of the world's leading producers of wheat, rice, sugarcane, and cotton, and much of that harvest comes directly from the small family farms that make up the backbone of rural life. In Punjab especially, wide golden fields of wheat stretch toward the horizon during harvest season, swaying gently whenever the wind passes through. When it comes time to harvest rice, entire families often work together in the fields, bending low to cut the stalks by hand in areas where machinery has not yet replaced tradition. It is physically demanding work, but it is also deeply communal. Neighbors help neighbors. Children learn by watching their parents and grandparents. Nobody is harvesting alone, and that shared effort is part of what gives rural life its unmistakable sense of belonging. In the warmer months, particularly across Punjab and Sindh, mango orchards become one of the most anticipated sights of the year. Pakistan is among the largest mango-producing countries in the world, and its Sindri and Chansa varieties are prized for their sweetness far beyond its borders. During harvest, entire orchards fill with the heavy, sweet scent of ripening fruit, and workers carefully hand-pick each mango so it does not bruise on the way to market. There is something almost cinematic about walking through a mango orchard in the countryside during harvest season, sunlight breaking through the leaves, the smell of ripe fruit hanging in the warm air, and the quiet sound of baskets being filled one mango at a time. It is a scene that could easily belong in a postcard, except here it is simply Tuesday. Rain, when it finally arrives after a long hot spell, changes the entire mood of a village. The smell of rain hitting dry earth, often called petrichor, mixes with the scent of nearby crops and freshly baked bread, creating an atmosphere that feels almost impossible to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. Children often run outside the moment the first drops fall, and for a few minutes, the entire village seems to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Cotton, another major crop across the plains, tells its own story through the seasons. Fields that once held tall green stalks slowly turn white as the bolls open, and picking season brings entire families out into the rows again, moving carefully from plant to plant, filling large sacks that are later weighed and sold at local collection points. It is slow, repetitive work, yet it carries a certain rhythm to it, almost meditative, the kind of task that leaves plenty of room for conversation and quiet thought while the hands stay busy. Sugarcane fields bring a different kind of energy entirely. When harvest time arrives, tall stalks are cut by hand and gathered into bundles, often loaded onto carts pulled by animals or small tractors, heading toward local mills where the cane is pressed for its sweet juice. Fresh sugarcane juice, cold and lightly spiced with ginger or mint, becomes one of the simple seasonal pleasures that entire villages look forward to. Sold from small hand-pressed stalls at the edge of the fields. To really understand this world, you have to look beyond the plains and into the specific villages that make Pakistan's countryside feel almost otherworldly. High in the north, tucked between snow-capped peaks, sits Karimabad, the heart of the Hunza Valley. Terraced apricot orchards climb the mountainside in neat green steps, and from almost any rooftop, you can see the glacier-capped summit of Rakaposhi glowing pink at sunrise. Winters here bring heavy snowfall that blankets the entire valley, and every year, as the snow settles over Karimabad's stone paths and orchards, small streams of tourists quietly make their way up the mountain roads just to witness it, drawn by photos of a valley that looks almost painted rather than real. Further east, hidden inside the Neelam Valley of Azad Kashmir, lies Orang Kel, a village so remote it can only be reached on foot or by a short chairlift ride across a river gorge. Wooden houses with sloped roofs sit scattered across an open alpine meadow, surrounded by thick pine forest on every side. There are no roads cutting through Orang Kel, no cars parked outside homes, only walking paths connecting one wooden house to the next, which is exactly what gives it its untouched, almost storybook quality. And tucked into the mountains of Upper Deer sits Kumrat Valley, where thick pine forests line a fast-moving turquoise river, and small wooden guest houses sit right at the water's edge. What was once a quiet, barely known valley has slowly become one of the most talked about hidden gems in the country, with more visitors arriving each summer, specifically searching for the kind of untouched, cinematic scenery that Kumrat offers almost by accident. Each of these villages tells its own version of the same story, that Pakistan's most breathtaking places are often the ones nobody outside the country has heard of yet. No countryside story in Pakistan would be complete without the animals that quietly shape daily life here. In almost every rural household, livestock is not just a source of income, it is part of the family's daily rhythm. Cows and buffaloes are milked by hand early in the morning, usually before the heat of the day sets in. The process is simple but requires patience and care, and in many households it is a task passed down from parents to children, generation after generation. Fresh milk, still warm, is often boiled the same morning and used for tea yogurt or to make traditional desi ghee, a clarified butter made by slowly simmering butter until the liquid fat separates from the milk solids. This ghee is then used for cooking almost everything, and its rich, nutty aroma is one of the most recognizable smells of a rural kitchen. Making ghee at home is its own quiet ritual. The cream skimmed from boiled milk is collected over several days, then churned by hand or with a simple wooden churner until butter begins to form. That butter is slowly heated in a pot over low flame, simmered patiently until the water content evaporates and the milk solids turn golden brown at the bottom, leaving behind clear, fragrant ghee that is then strained and stored for months. The whole kitchen fills with a warm, nutty aroma during this process, one that lingers in the memory of anyone who grew up around it. Goats are commonly seen grazing in open fields or tied near homes, often looked after by children who take real pride in caring for them. Chickens roam freely around many homes, and their eggs are collected fresh each morning, still warm from the coop, destined for breakfast within the hour. In some areas, particularly in the north, Horses are kept in small stables a short distance from the house, used for transport across rugged terrain where roads have not yet reached. Caring for animals here is never treated as a chore to rush through. Buffaloes are washed in nearby canals during the hottest part of the day, often by children who see it as more of a game than a task, splashing water and laughing as the animals stand patiently in the shallow water. Feeding time in the evening brings its own quiet routine, fresh-cut fodder carried in bundles balanced on shoulders, animals waiting calmly by their pens, recognizing footsteps long before they see a face. At night, especially during the warmer months, the countryside comes alive with a very different kind of sound. Crickets begin their steady chorus as the sun disappears, sometimes joined by frogs near irrigation channels or a distant dog announcing the presence of a stranger. It is a soundscape that feels almost orchestral, entirely natural, and completely free of the mechanical hum that fills most modern nights elsewhere in the world. Village homes across Pakistan often carry a quiet, distinctive beauty that many visitors do not expect. Wooden doors painted in shades of green are especially common in older village homes, a tradition that has continued for decades in many regions. Some believe the color was originally chosen because it was affordable and long-lasting, while for others it has simply become a marker of home, something familiar and comforting to return to after a long day in the fields. Walls are often made from a mix of mud brick and cement, kept cool during summer and surprisingly warm during winter. In areas without reliable electricity or during the frequent power outages that many rural areas still experience, homes are lit by lanterns once the sun sets down. The soft, flickering glow of lantern light against a mud brick wall creates an atmosphere that feels almost timeless, a scene that could belong just as easily to today as it could to 100 years ago. In the northern valleys, particularly in regions like Hunza and the surrounding mountains, winter brings snow that blankets rooftops and quiet stone pathways between homes. Life slows down even further here during the colder months, and families gather closer around indoor fires, sharing food and stories while the world outside turns white and silent. Interestingly, in these same northern valleys, apricot kernel oil has been used for generations, not just in cooking, but also applied to the skin as a traditional beauty remedy. Local families have long believed that this cold-pressed oil, made from the kernels of their own apricot harvest, helps these keep skin nourished and youthful, a small but fascinating detail that connects daily farm life directly to personal care in a way that feels wonderfully self-sufficient. Unpaved or lightly paved lanes just wide enough for a bicycle or a donkey cart to pass through, winding between courtyard walls and green-painted doors rather than running in straight modern grids. Cars are a rare sight in the smaller villages, and when they do appear, they move slowly, often waiting patiently behind a donkey cart loaded with sacks of grain or a herd of goats being walked home. Bicycles remain one of the most common ways to get around, ridden by children heading to school, farmers checking on distant fields, or a father carrying his son on the crossbar toward the local market. Donkey carts, still built much the way they have been for generations, remain essential for hauling fodder, firewood, and produce along paths too narrow or too rough for anything else. Healthcare in these villages looks very different from what exists in the cities as well. There is rarely a large hospital nearby. Instead, small local clinics handle everyday illnesses, vaccinations, and minor injuries, usually staffed by a single doctor or a trained health worker who knows most of the village by name. For serious emergencies, families rely on the nearest town or city, sometimes an hour or more away, a reminder that this peaceful, slower way of life also comes with real trade-offs that are rarely mentioned in the postcard version of rural beauty. If mornings in the Pakistani countryside are about waking gently into the day, evenings are about slowing all the way back down. As the heat of the afternoon fades, families often bring out a charpai, a traditional hand-woven rope bed, and place it outside in the courtyard or under a large tree. This is where much of village social life actually happens. Neighbors gather, tea is poured, and conversations unfold slowly without any rush to finish them. There is no scrolling through a phone here, no notifications pulling attention away. Just quiet conversation, warm tea, and the simple pleasure of being present with people you have known your entire life. During these evenings, it is common to smell freshly baked corn roasting over hot coals, a popular seasonal snack, along with the comforting smell of homemade biscuits or sweet treats prepared earlier in the day. Children often play nearby until it grows dark, their laughter mixing with the sound of crickets that have already begun their nightly chorus. Tea itself deserves its own mention here, because in rural Pakistan it is far more than a drink. It is simmered slowly on a wood or gas stove, milk and tea leaves boiled together until the color turns deep amber, often sweetened generously and occasionally flavored with a crushed cardamom pod. It is offered constantly, to guests, to neighbors dropping by, to anyone simply passing through, and refusing a cup is almost unheard of. An entire afternoon can pass over a single pot of tea and unhurried conversation, and that unhurried quality is really the whole point. Earlier in the afternoon, before the tea and the sharpes come out, the village belongs to the children. A rope swing tied to the thick branch of an old tree is one of the simplest and most common sights, kids taking turns pushing each other higher while chickens scatter below. In open fields or dusty side streets, a game of cricket almost always seems to be underway. Played with a taped tennis ball and a bat that has clearly seen better days, using a stack of bricks or a tree stump as the wicket. On weekends, once the sun goes down and the entire family is finally home together, a board of Ludo or a worn deck of cards comes out on the charpai, and what starts as a friendly game often turns into the loudest, most competitive part of the entire week. Because days start so early, nights in rural Pakistan tend to end early as well. Many households settle in for the night by 7 or 8 in the evening, especially in villages without much artificial lighting to extend the day. It might sound surprising to someone used to city nightlife, but there is a certain wisdom in it. When your day begins with the sunrise, your body naturally wants to rest when the sun disappears. If there is one thing that consistently surprises outsiders about Pakistani village life, it is the hospitality. Guests, even complete strangers, are rarely allowed to live without being offered tea, food, or both. In many villages, turning down an invitation to eat is considered almost impolite, because sharing food with a guest is seen as an honor rather than an obligation. This sense of generosity is not performative. It comes from a deeply rooted cultural value that treats guests as a blessing, and it shows up in the smallest details, from someone insisting you take the last piece of fruit, to an elderly neighbor calling out simply to ask if you have eaten today. In a world that often feels increasingly disconnected, this kind of warmth feels almost radical. Community bonds in these villages are strong in a way that modern life has slowly eroded elsewhere. Neighbors genuinely know each other, often for generations. When someone falls ill, help arrives without being asked. When a family celebrates a wedding, the entire village becomes part of it. This is not a curated version of community. It is simply how life has always worked here, and it remains one of the most striking differences between rural Pakistan and much of the modern world. Much of that self-sufficiency runs through the hands of the women in these households. Many still make their own soap at home, often infused with dried lavender or rose petals grown in a small corner of the courtyard, boiled and set the traditional way rather than bought from a store. Rugs for the sofa, curtains for the windows, and even clothes for the children are frequently handmade too, knitted or stitched during quiet afternoons. Patterns passed down from mothers and grandmothers rather than learned from a pattern book. It is a quiet kind of craftsmanship that rarely gets noticed from the outside, yet it fills nearly every corner of a rural Pakistani home. Just like the daily rhythm of sunrise and sunset, the seasons here dictate almost every part of rural life. Summers can be intensely hot, particularly across the plains of Punjab and Sindh, with temperatures often climbing well above 40 degrees Celsius. During these months, much of the outdoor work is done early in the morning or later in the evening, avoiding the harshest heat of midday. Winters bring a completely different atmosphere. Mornings often begin wrapped in a thick, soft fog that can linger for hours before finally lifting, revealing fields glistened with frost. The weather turns cool and pleasant, and for many families, winter evenings become a time for gathering closer together, often around a fire, sharing hot tea and simple conversation that stretches late into the night, at least by rural standards. In the northern regions, winter arrives with actual snowfall, transforming entire villages into quiet, white landscapes. Rooftops disappear under a soft layer of snow, and the usual sounds of daily life grow even quieter, muffled by the snow itself. It is a side of Pakistan that rarely appears in international coverage of the country, yet it exists exactly as it has for centuries. tucked quietly into the mountains. It would be easy for someone unfamiliar with this way of life to assume that rural simplicity means hardship. But spend enough time here, or even hear enough stories from those who live it, and a different picture begins to form. This is not a life lacking in comfort. It is a life intentionally built around what actually matters. Fresh food grown by your own hands. Family gathered close by. A community that genuinely looks out for one another. Time that is not constantly being chased. Meals often center around whatever the land has provided that season: flatbreads, seasonal vegetables, fresh dairy, and rice grown just fields away. Nothing travels far to reach the table, and very little goes to waste. There is a quiet dignity in that kind of self-sufficiency that modern convenience has in many places slowly replaced. Bread itself is almost never bought here. It is baked fresh, usually by the women of the household. In a clay oven called a tandoor built right into the courtyard. Dough is slapped by hand against the inner wall of the glowing clay, and within minutes it puffs up blistered and smoky, pulled out with a pair of tongs while still too hot to touch. In many villages, women gather around a shared tandoor in the morning, baking enough bread for several households at once, turning a daily chore into a small social ritual. For special occasions, particularly in Balochistan and the tribal belt near the Afghan border, a dish called saji takes center stage. Whole lamb or chicken is seasoned simply with salt, skewered, and hung to roast slowly over glowing coals for hours, until the meat turns tender and smoky. It is traditionally a dish of celebration and hospitality, prepared for guests and festivals rather than an everyday meal, and the sight of it turning slowly over an open fire is one of the most striking images in all of Pakistani rural cooking. The countryside also holds some genuinely rare ingredients that rarely get the recognition they deserve. In the mountains of the Suleiman Range and parts of Chitral, Chilgoza pine nuts grow on centuries-old pine trees, hand-harvested every autumn using long poles to pull down the cones, a process so slow and labor-intensive that pine nuts remain one of the most expensive dry fruits in the world. In the salt mines of Kira in Punjab, home to one of the largest salt deposits on Earth, pink salt is carved directly from the mountain itself, its rosy color coming from trace minerals trapped inside the rock for millions of years. And perhaps that is exactly why this version of Pakistan deserves far more attention than it usually receives. It challenges nearly every assumption most people carry about the country, replacing noise with quiet, chaos with community, and hardship with a version of contentment that many in the modern world are actively searching for and rarely finding. Despite growing modernization across Pakistan's major cities, rural life in the countryside has remained remarkably consistent for generations, and that consistency is not by accident. Many families choose to remain in their villages even when opportunities in the cities exist, because the trade-off, more money for less connection, less land, and less peace, simply does not feel worth it to them. There is also a strong intergenerational pull. Children grow up learning to farm alongside their parents and grandparents, absorbing not just skills but an entire worldview built around patience, community, and respect for the land. That knowledge, passed down without ever being written in a textbook, is part of what keeps this way of life alive well into the modern era. Even as parts of Pakistan continue to develop rapidly, these villages remain quietly unchanged in the ways that matter most. The fields still need tending. The animals still need feeding. The tea still gets poured every evening on a charpai beneath the stars, and somehow, that unchanging rhythm has become the very thing that makes this version of life feel so deeply peaceful. There is one part of this life that rarely gets mentioned, and it might be the most important part of all. Childhood in the Pakistani countryside looks almost nothing like childhood in a modern city, and once you see it, you may start to wonder which version actually sounds more fulfilling. Children here grow up surrounded by open space rather than screens. Many learn to herd goats before they learn to read, walking alongside animals that are sometimes taller than they are, guiding them back home just as the sky starts to change color. Others spend their afternoons helping collect eggs from the chicken coop, carefully cupping warm shells in their small hands, careful not to drop a single one. By the time most rural children are old enough to attend school, they already understand things that many adults elsewhere never learn: how to read the sky before rain arrives, how to tell when fruit is ready to be picked simply by its smell, how to sit quietly beside an animal until it trusts you enough to be milked. This is not something taught in a classroom. It is absorbed simply by living here, day after day, season after season. And yet, education still matters deeply to these families. Many villages now have small local schools, and parents often make real sacrifices to make sure their children attend. believing that knowledge from books and knowledge from the land can exist together, each one making the other stronger. Life in the countryside is not only quiet fields and early mornings. Every so often that quiet gives way to something louder and more colorful. Weekly village markets, often called mandis, bring farmers together from surrounding areas to sell fresh produce, livestock, and handmade goods. The air fills with the sound of bargaining voices, the smell of fried snacks sizzling on open stoves, and the occasional bleating of goats being led through the crowd. These markets are about far more than commerce. They are one of the few times during the week when an entire region gathers in one place, catching up on news, arranging marriages, trading stories, and simply enjoying each other's company outside the usual rhythm of farm work. Then there are the festivals, moments when the entire village seems to transform overnight. During harvest celebrations, homes are decorated, special foods are prepared over wood fires that burn long into the evening, and music drifts from courtyards where families and neighbors gather to celebrate the reward of months of hard work. Weddings in particular can stretch across several days, with nearly the entire village taking part in some way, whether through cooking, decorating, or simply showing up to share in the joy. It is in these moments that the deep sense of community mentioned earlier becomes impossible to miss. Nobody celebrates alone here, and in many ways, nobody grieves alone either. Life's biggest moments, both joyful and difficult, are shared collectively, carried together rather than faced in isolation. By now, the picture of Pakistan you started this video with has probably shifted. Instead of chaos, there is calm. Instead of crowded cities, there are wide-open fields stretching toward distant mountains. Instead of disconnection, there is a community so tightly woven that a single household rarely faces anything alone. This is not the entire story of Pakistan. No single video could ever capture that. But it is a real and often overlooked part of it, one that exists quietly in thousands of villages across the country, largely unnoticed by the rest of the world. Wheat swaying in the wind, mangoes ripening in the orchard heat, fresh milk being poured into morning tea, a green wooden door creaking open just as the call to prayer fades into the morning air. Maybe that is the real takeaway here, that somewhere far from the noise of modern life, in the countryside of a nation so often misunderstood, there is a version of living slower, closer to the land and closer to each other that continues quietly, one sunrise at a time.